Number 10. What if the Avengers battled the Carnage Cosmic? Carnage Cosmic is a version of Carnage where he is bonded to none other than the Silver Surfer. During the first appearance of this hypothetical monstrosity, Carnage simply used Silver Surfer as a mode of transportation to get back to his beloved host, Cletus Cassidy. However, in issue 108 of What If Volume 2 in the 1989 series, we examine what would happen if the villain became more of a greater threat. It takes all of the Avengers to even stand a chance against him, and even then they are overwhelmed. In the end, Silver Surfer is forced to fly into the sun to get rid of this stubborn and deadly symbiote, which also means he has to fight for control all the while. Number 9. What if Rick Jones became the Hulk? Okay, so admittedly this story is more silly than scary, but if you actually think through everything Rick Jones goes through here and the fate of Hulk at the end of the story, it can be seen as, well, being pretty scary. Also, I just really like it. Like Annihilus' voice and demeanor, it's both a scary and raunchy story. Yeah, you heard me right, raunchy. Don't ask me, Rick is the one that mentions Annihilus' raunchiness in this issue. Here we see Rick not only become the big green Goliath, but we also watch as he finds himself bonded with Captain Marvel as well, sharing a body with him. So, just a lot going on all at once in my opinion. You'd think we'd swap his Marvel Negaband story for the Hulk one, but no, we're not going to do that. In this reality, both happen. In the end, Mr. Fantastic and a normal Bruce Banner end up helping Rick return to normal, but Hulk remains trapped in the Negazone with Annihilus, so they kind of get like separated. He makes quick work of the villain while in the Negazone, then remains stuck there for forever? He doesn't seem to mind at the end of the story, but I feel like if we checked back on him in a few months, he wouldn't be quite as happy. Seems like a strangely happy spin on what should be a pretty dark ending. I also just like how everyone after is like, it turned out great for everyone, or for most of us. What? How's Hulk? And Rick's just like, I'm sure he's fine. Cut to Hulk having the best time. And before we move on to our number 8 spot, just a quick reminder, if you're enjoying this list and lists like this, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out here at the channel.
In at number 8, What If? X-Men Wedding Album. Issue 60 from Volume 2 of the What If series explored a specific theme. It contains a slew of stories related to Cyclops and Jean Grey's relationship, exploring different facets and possibilities. There's What If Scott Summers and Jean Grey had married earlier, which sees the couple marrying earlier on during the beginnings of the mutant team. Another one is What If Scott Summers and Jean Grey had never fallen in love at all, which results in Cyclops leaving the X-Men team altogether. Then there's What If Phoenix had fallen for Wolverine, perhaps the most tragic tale of them all, which involves the X-Men disbanding, ultimately thanks to the fact that all of the characters die. The framing for the entire issue revolves around the mainstream Earth 616 continuity of Jean and Scott, particularly pertaining to X-Men Volume 2 Issue 30, in which the two have their wedding. And at 7, What If Cable had destroyed the X-Men? This one comes from What If Volume 2 Issue 46, which was released in 1993. Its narrative follows Charles Xavier returning to Earth after being on a hiatus, only to discover that his X-Men teams have all strayed significantly. He holds meetings with each of the teams only to get into a fight with Cable, in which a battle ensues. Some side with Xavier while others side with Cable, and Cable ends up fleeing. Later on, he assassinates Xavier along with Jean Grey and Scott Summers, killing them when they least expect it by launching a siren bomb at their dinner table. This causes a major disturbance between the members of all the X teams, dividing them, causing them to fight amongst themselves. In the meantime, the teams outside of the mutant-based ones are forced to pick up the slack. The Avengers and Fantastic Four are fighting off typical X-Men villains since the X-Men are too busy beating each other up instead. There's a massive fight and Wolverine's team of mutants clashes with Cable's team, killing Cable and his pals. Everything kind of falls apart there, with Magneto swooping in to try to get the remaining members of these battle-worn teams to join up with him. And talk about being an opportunist. Can you blame him though? And at 6, What If Wolverine was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D? This one might be my personal favorite. From What If Volume 2 Issue 7, first released in 1989, here we have Wolverine, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. The timeline diverges from the 616 timeline after Wolverine encounters the Wendigo with the Hulk. After that battle, he goes on loan to S.H.I.E.L.D. for a single mission to help them retrieve a stolen LMD tech. Hydra, of course, is the culprit behind the theft. Nick Fury and Wolverine hunt down the LMD robots and destroy them, one of which includes a decoy of Dum Dum Dugan. Upset about this revelation, Fury sends Wolverine and Black Widow to hunt down any other LMDs possibly infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. Turns out half of the crew on board of their ship were robots. The trio then set out to hit hit Hydra's base and rescue the real Dum-Dum, which has them crossing paths with Madame Hydra and Baron von Strucker, who is in possession of the Satan Claw. A brawl ensues, with S.H.I.E.L.D. being victorious. Fury then offers Wolverine a spot permanently on the team, and Logan, wanting a change of pace, agrees. It's around this time on 616 that he'd be joining up with the X-Men anyway. Logan rises in the ranks, becoming Fury's number 2, and later on, Fury is murdered by Strucker LMD seeking revenge, who takes him out in his flying Ferrari nonetheless. Gotta love the 80s. At Fury's funeral, Dum-Dum retires, which makes Logan the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. This has a powerful domino effect on the world. Using S.H.I.E.L.D., Wolverine prevents several major events in the Marvel Universe, including the creation of Sentinels, Dark Phoenix's emergence, there's no Mutant Registration Act, and overall, it improves human and mutant relations for the better. Kind of hurts to see the potential Logan had at S.H.I.E.L.D., doesn't it? But on a different note, fun fact, another story in this issue is what if Aunt May was a mutant with claws? So I guess, that's one hell of a reminder that this is a what if issue. In at number 5, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? Based on the comic New Mutants Special Edition issue 1, What If the X-Men Had Stayed in Asgard is a riff off of a story in which concluded with them leaving Asgard to return to Earth. The premise is very self-explanatory here. The X-Men all vote, and those who wish to leave are sent home by Loki. The rest of the story follows the lives of these remaining X-Men and how they assimilate into Asgardian culture. Rogue finds love, being able to touch the Asgardian people. Mirage becomes a Valkyrie. Storm becomes the goddess of thunder, and Loki attempts to trick her into slaying his brother, who has been transformed into a frog. Hela then attacks Asgard, and the X-Men alongside Thor, who is eventually transformed back to his normal self, fight her and her army. They defeat her, and Thor returns to Earth, giving Storm the throne and Asgard to rule. And Loki? Well, for the tricks that he played in getting the X-Men to stay, he slowly goes mad by the end of the comic, thanks to the ones who sit above in shadow. Moving on to number 4, what if the new X-Men had died on their very first mission? Coming out of What If Volume 2 Issue 9, this comic book has a wonderful cover. It's Charles Xavier being pushed away from the X-Men's funeral by Beast, shouting out up into the heavens, "The X-Men are dead and I killed them!" The concept for this one places the original X-Men and the new X-Men being killed off on their mission, with Xavier telepathically feeling each and every one of their deaths. Beast, the only X-Men member to not have gone on this mission, tries to console the depressed Xavier. Count Nefaria sees how weakened the X-Men are and attacks, which forces Beast into forming a new ragtag team that consists of himself, Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Siren, Warpath, and Namorita, the female version of Namor. This new team end up fighting and defeating Count Nefaria, and Xavier, seeing this new team all put together, begins to come out of his depression, asking the new team to stay on and become official X-Men. All works out for the best. Except, all of the original ones are dead, but hey. Moving on to number 3, what if Wolverine had killed the Hulk? From What If Volume 1 Issue 13, we see a rehashing of Wolverine's first appearance in the comics, when he first crossed paths with the Hulk in the Incredible Hulk issue 181. Although he technically made a cameo in the issue prior, but cameo. It was like in a panel. Now in that story, Wolverine and the Hulk initially see each other as a threat before teaming up together to take down the Wendigo. But in this story though, Wolverine and the Hulk duke it out. And rather than being interrupted by the Wendigo, which initially causes them to stop fighting each other, the Wendigo never shows up. This ends up resulting in Wolverine fatally wounding the Hulk, and leads to him fleeing from authorities despite his attacks being out of self-defense. Because he's on the run, he doesn't join the X-Men. Instead, he teams up with Magneto and joins the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, with his first assignment being to infiltrate the X-Men. He does, but in the process grows close to the mutant team, and when the time comes for him to double-cross them, he just can't do it. Instead, he turns on Magneto, and Magneto and Wolverine fights, with them killing each other in the process. And at number 2, what if Wolverine was Lord of the Vampires? This one's great. Here's a what if story that should be familiar to some of you who frequent our channel. From What If Volume 2 Issue 24, what if Wolverine was Lord of the Vampires? Tells the tale of Wolverine and the X-Men crossing paths with none other than Count Dracula. The two fight, and Wolverine gets bitten, becoming a vampire himself. But thanks to his willpower, he's able to evade Dracula's mind control abilities, and ends up fighting him for dominance. Wolverine succeeds and kills him, and then proceeds to transform all of the other X-Men into vampires, with him and his new army going around biting beloved heroes and draining them of their blood. Eventually, for some reason that I swear totally makes sense, Doctor Strange has taken over the body of the Punisher and goes after Wolverine, and manages to get through to Logan in the end, stopping his blood reign of terror. And finally, in at number 1, what if Phoenix had not died? From What If Issue 27 Volume 1, we see the Watcher looking into an alternate reality in which Jean Grey did not die during the incursion with the Shi'ar. Rather, she was reborn. And when the X-Men find themselves facing off against Galactus and Terrax in the Shi'ar galaxy, the Phoenix rises and kicks some serious Scariest but stopping Galactus. But something is not right. Jean Grey is overwhelmed by the Phoenix Force and ends up losing control, destroying a star. Once back home on Earth at the X-Mansion, Kitty Pryde confronts Jean about the star that she destroyed. This does not bode well. Jean loses it and becomes Dark Phoenix, killing Kitty in response. The X-Men attempt to stop her, but her rampage continues. She ends up killing Polaris. Cyclops tries to intervene too, but Phoenix murders him as well. And it only gets worse from there. Jean entirely loses control and the Phoenix Force engulfs the entire world, destroying it, with it continuing to expand in the universe, consuming it all bit by bit. Talk about depressing.
Number 10. What if Mary Jane had been shot instead of Aunt May? This is a really epic and dark story where Peter ends up going on a rampage when Mary Jane is killed by Kingpin's hired sniper assassin instead of Aunt May. Peter manages to save Aunt May, but Mary Jane ends up dead, and as a result, Pete dons his black suit and goes after the Kingpin himself. He is met with resistance when Tony Stark as Iron Man attempts to confront him and talk sense into him. Spider-Man, however, is too far gone and is definitely not in the mood for advice from Tony Stark. This results in an epic fight between the two heroes, while Wilson Fisk's life hangs in the balance of who will win. In the end, Peter ends up getting his revenge, one-punching Fisk to death before being arrested by the authorities. He regrets ever trusting Tony Stark and ever marrying Mary Jane. As Wilson Fisk would say, this issue is so goth. Number 9. What if Spider-Man became the Punisher? This one ends up at least having a happy ending, but starts off being pretty dark and pretty scary. In this story, we imagine what life would have been like for Peter if he had become the Punisher. Instead of beating his villains and them ending up just locked away, for many, their fate is much more final. Even the Green Goblin ends up being killed by Spider-Man Punisher following the confrontation with Gwen at the bridge. Gwen, however, lives, not killed from the great height from which she was dropped. I do love how they keep drilling in that it would be the fall, not the impact, that would kill her, like in the original story, which I always thought was so bizarre. Spider-Man Punisher saves Gwen, but Green Goblin ends up dead, and Harry swears vengeance on the man who killed his father. Although this story has a dark and murderous narrative, it gives us a more happy ending, sort of. Peter chooses love instead of vengeance in the end and gives up being the Punisher, retiring from vigilante life to go be happy with Gwen. As this decision is made, however, Frank Castle loses his family and miraculously survives the shootout in Central Park, in the end becoming the Punisher in this reality as was fated. Although I do think it's really weird in that story that like Gwen living is the thing that like changes that for him. If your like girlfriend's life was threatened, wouldn't that make you more angry? Maybe not. I've never been Spider-Man, so I don't really know. Alright friends, before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder to click that thumbs up. It's good for your health, it's good for your heart, it's good for your brain.
In a date Age of Ultron. Ultron 1320 comes from Earth 14622, and What If Age of Ultron number 1. An Earth where, thanks to Wasp dying, Ultron is able to take over the world faster. Ultron was created to be the ultimate AI by Hank Pym, to help the Avengers utilize their function better as a team. But with the untimely death of Pym's wife, Pym went on to create a more brutal version of Ultron, which was to replace the Avengers. But with this, Ultron's sentience began to constantly evolve. He started the eradication of the human race by taking out such threats as the Avengers and the Defenders, while he left Pym alive to watch him suffer. Ultron and his army of Ultron Sentinels then moved to Kola, Russia, so that he could bore himself into the planet's core to create the ultimate version of himself, Ultron 1320. Ultron then had his minions batter and beat Pym unconscious until he woke up to find that he himself had been turned into Ultron 1321. This version of Ultron also invaded other worlds, claiming Earth 62412, 23223, and 81223, but was stopped on Earth 45162. In its 7th Age of Apocalypse, Earth 295 is a reality that was accidentally created by Legion, son of X-Men leader Professor Charles Xavier and Israeli diplomat Gabriel Haller. Legion believed that the only way to bring peace to humans and mutants was to kill Magneto before he could incite the anti-mutant movement. He traveled back to a time when Xavier and Magneto both lived in Israel and were working at a hospital, taking the X-Men Storm, Iceman, Bishop, and Psylocke back with him. Legion tried to stab Magneto with a Psyblade, but Xavier shielded Magneto and was killed instead. By killing his own father, Legion then made his own existence impossible. The Macron Crystal resolved the paradox by restructuring reality. All the X-Men vanished from that reality, and a new reality came into existence. Bishop, already displaced in time, remained, but the chronal backlash fractured his mind. He wandered Earth for nearly 20 years, and then that superpowered fight attracted the attention of Apocalypse, who then basically took over and destroyed everything. In its 6th, Old Man Logan. 50 years later, Logan lives with his wife Maureen and his son Scotty and daughter Jade on a plot of land in Sacramento. What used to be California, but is now part of Hulkland. He requires money to pay his rent to the landlords of his territory, the descendants of Bruce Banner, the Hulk gang, who are a product of just a whole lot of crap, okay? Just give me a minute. He refuses to sell his children's toys to pay for the rent, understandably, and Logan is shown as a broken old man, refusing to fight anyone and trying to live peacefully. He realizes that he will be unable to pay the rent this month, and that the Hulk gang will not accept a plea to pay double next month on its own. By the way, the Hulk gang is a inappropriately and unconsensually conceived group of children of the Hulk and She-Hulk, Bruce's cousin. Yeah. The Hulk gang arrives the next day to confront Logan on his lack of payment and then violently beat him, even though he was one of the most violent superheroes ever. Though Logan entertains visions of gutting the eldest Hulk brother Otis, he remains calm and just lets the beating happen. Later though, the Hulk gang kills his family, so Logan goes on to kill the whole Hulk gang. But it's still a messed up Earth, okay? It is. Halfway through into number 5, Earth X. The entire world has mutated due to the release of the Terrigen mists in the air. The now blind Watcher recruits Aaron Stack to be his eyes and inform him of what's going on Earth. X-51 finds that in this new world where everyone has superhuman abilities, a young man named the Skull is attempting to take over the world. And Captain America and a band of former champions of Earth have rallied together to stop him, but there's more going on here than meets the eye. It is learned that the Celestials have manipulated the people of Earth into being antibodies for a celestial embryo that is growing in the Earth's core. With humanity in a state of mutation that is not destined to happen for another 300 years, the Celestials come to cleanse the human race from the face of the Earth. Only the intervention of Reed Richards, Black Bolt, and Franklin Richards, who is now Galactus, stop the Celestials and destroys the thing growing at the center of the Earth. At the end of the battle, Galactus returns to space, and Reed has giant human torches built around the Earth to burn the Terrigen mists out of the air in an attempt to return humanity back to their former state. In at 4, Ruins. While Marvel was showcasing their best and brightest with Earth 616, Ruins takes a dark and twisted look at an alternate Marvel Earth where everything could have gone wrong, and it does, in the worst possible ways. The various scientific accidents and experiments that created Marvel's heroes went extremely wrong in the Ruins reality, alright? The Fantastic Four died on their test run in space, Bruce Banner was transformed into a living mass of tumors instead of the Hulk, and Peter Parker's spider bite left him with a terrifyingly infectious disease that ultimately ends up killing the narrator of the story in the truly darkest Marvel timeline. However, this is basically how the creators thought the world would be if the superheroes were real. It is in essence a combination of Earth 616 and our world, with the idea of what would happen realistically if this was our world being the founding thoughts for the Ruined storylines. And it's hella messed up, but I don't think that in this world Bruce would grow tumors, okay? I think he would just die. Probably from cancer, but still, okay, it's a more realistic version, but a much darker version of the realism. Getting close to the end in at number 3, Earth 666. First appearing in Secret Adventures number 33 from 2012, on Earth 666, everyone in the world is one of the undead, but this isn't Marvel Zombies. I was told not to talk about Marvel Zombies. The living were not endured on this world, nor do they welcome interdimensional police. The Orb of Necromancy was hidden by Brother Voodoo, who put it deep in Shumagorath's ego maze. In the center tower, where an undead celestial was located and who was their god, and with the orb, they planned to spread undeath to all of reality. And it's currently in a unique position, as its population is divided between a variety of subtypes of supernatural creatures. Vampires, werewolves, mummies, among others. The divide between the various groups is social and deeply rooted, with parts of the world being ruled by various factions. However, in this world there is some hope, as the greatest heroes of the various groups are united to protect the world as the Avengers of the Undead. Basically, if Marvel met Supernatural, especially that episode where like there was like the Chicago monster families and it was like a parody of the Mafia, that's what's going on, especially because Captain America's shield is made of vibranium, not silver. Get it? Cause Cap's a werewolf this time? The alternative to the number 666 in some translations of the Bible is actually 616, the number used for Marvel's Prime Earth, so there you go. But ultimately, in at number 2, Hulk number 3. The world first explored in Hulk number 3 from 2021 is quite an interesting one. Here we meet another Bruce Banner who doesn't actually have a Hulk form. Instead, his Game of Bombs were a success, but the government then took them and then started using them against their enemies, which caused intense radiation that turns those affected into, as the military called them, bio-waste casualties, which in this reality are their own versions of Hulk and She-Hulk, horrifically disfigured for the most part. This Earth's version of Bruce ends up disposing of these Hulks by throwing them into the void, which even he doesn't know where it sends them. Although, if I'm being honest, this kind of reminds me of the Rick Potion number 9 episode of Rick and Morty season 1. You know, like the one where Morty wants to go to the dance with Jessica, but he ends up giving her like a love potion, but it's flu season, and then Rick tries to fix everyone by turning everyone into praying mantises, and then a combination of like a load of different DNAs that was supposed to equal human but doesn't. Yeah, that's kind of how I see these Hulks, but to not such an extreme where Bruce needs to like change worlds. And finally, into number 1, the Cancerverse. The Cancerverse is a reality where life finally defeated death, with eternal life being fueled by the many-angled ones. Every living being in this universe was corrupted and turned to their servitude, resulting in a universe-wide living corpse, which means that they aren't zombies, okay, since zombies are undead and nobody in this earth can die. Before the death of Captain Marvel, with no cure or anything to save him, his terminal condition caused such distress among the people who adored him. Across the universe, all the empathetic trauma was sensed by the many-angled ones. They reached out to the dying Mar-Vell to give them one simple truth: even death may die. While Avengers, Defenders, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and other heroes were present for a vigil at his deathbed at this point, Mar-Vell transmuted his closest allies, among them the Avengers, now the Revengers. Despite the opposition of many, including seemingly at least members of the Machine Resistance, the corrupted heroes performed a ritual known as necropsy, sacrificing the Avatar of Death on the spacecraft Sanctuary and consequently annihilating death itself. Yeah.
And at number 10, Holocaust. I mean, his name enough should have you wary. Holocaust first appeared in 1995's X-Men Alpha, and is one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse. Holocaust was initially from the Age of Apocalypse timeline, where he was known as Nemesis, where he was said to be one of Apocalypse's children. Magneto would strip Nemesis of his flesh in a battle, enraged for the deaths that Nemesis had caused. His body was then retrieved by Apocalypse, who gave him to Dark Beast, who managed to capture his spiritual essence and put it inside a near-indestructible crystalline exo-armor, a procedure in which Nemesis became Holocaust, or rather, Holocaust was born. This character is particularly terrifying for one specific reason: his abilities. He initially possessed the power to generate highly destructive bionuclear microwave energy blasts, which can be super destructive. And later on, when he became an energy being, he gained the ability to drain the life force from other beings in order to charge his own exoskeleton that acted as a suit of armor for him. He's pretty much physically invulnerable, or at least he was. The character was killed by Hyperion, who cracked open Holocaust's exoskeleton and then absorbed all of his bioenergy into himself by literally inhaling him. So that's a fun way to go. And at number 9, Krakoa. Krakoa is one of the X-Men's earliest villains, having appeared in Giant Size X-Men issue 1 in 1975. There's been 2 versions of Krakoa over the years, with the first being the villainous one. It appeared initially as a small island in the Pacific Ocean that was located near a nuclear bombing test site. The radiation from that test site mutated the island's ecosystem, which altered the island into a hive mind entity in 1945, something that Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos witnessed. They encountered much of the island's intelligence and established a peaceful treaty in exchange for keeping the island's existence a complete secret. Now flash forward to 1975. Krakoa decides it's hungry and it wants to feed on the life force of mutants, because I guess mutants are tastier than humans. It kills a young mutant team and later captures the original iteration of X-Men. This is what causes Professor Xavier to create the second wave of X-Men, the team that consists of Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, Sunfire, and Banshee, all to save the first iteration. Polaris eventually launches Krakoa into outer space, and later it becomes captured by the Stranger. Now this Krakoa is perhaps one of the most physically intimidating entities that the mutant team has ever fought. It is a literal monstrous island. The second version of it though, in case you're wondering, is much more benevolent, having been grown by a member of the Hellfire Club but wanting to redeem itself with the X-Men and become one of them. It ends up becoming a part of the school and even helps the X-Men financially by growing diamonds on a tree that it produces. Man, imagine having a friend who could grow diamonds on trees for you. It's the dream. dream. Moving on to number 8, Hawkeye of Earth 11223. This version of Hawkeye is a product of the What If Dark Reign title from issue 1, volume 1. In this story, set on Earth 11223, Clint is a member of the Avengers, as per usual. The team goes after the X-Men, believing they are involved in the deaths of Tony Stark and Beast. That's when Hawkeye pretty much gets his butt handed to him by Sabretooth. Ultimately, his life is spared by the mutants, but it only gets more tragic for the sharpshooter from there on out. He heads back to the Avengers mansion, only to witness it getting completely destroyed, with all of the remaining Avengers being killed in the process. So Hawkeye takes matters into his own hands and seeks out the culprit, Norman Osborn, believing that he doesn't deserve to live, and that killing him is the only way to end his reign of terror. Dark Hawkeye. And at number 7, Venom Thor from Earth 1089. This alternate Thor comes from What If Volume 2, Issue 4, in a story called What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man. The alien costume it's referring to is Venom prior to the character coming into his full-fledged Eddie Brock-hosted glory. In this hypothetical tale, Peter Parker doesn't seek out the help of Reed Richards like he does on the 616 Earth. Instead, the Venom symbiote stays bonded to Parker until he begins to sniff out some stronger potential hosts, having used up all of Parker's adrenaline in the process. Now initially, the Venom symbiote jumps to the Hulk, but when he sets eyes on Thor, he ditches Hulk and heads over to the Asgardian god. Thor's tenure as Venom is brief, with Reed Richards employing the help of Black Bolt to use his sonic scream to separate Thor from Venom before the two are permanently bonded. But in the process, Black Bolt does destroy Mount Rushmore. But hey, at least Thor ends up getting free of the symbiote. That's at least good, right? I mean, it's only Mount Rushmore. In at number 6, the Ultimate's Black Widow. This version of Black Widow is notably worse than the one we mentioned previously. I mean, she is, higher up on the list, so kind of a given. The Ultimate's 1610 universe in general gives us a grim take on beloved Marvel characters, exploring different aspects of their character personality traits that were never ventured into in the 616 universe. This Black Widow is a prime example of that. Her origin story is similar to her 616 beginnings, but the reason she's called Black Widow is thanks to a reputation she's cultivated by killing her husbands, marrying frequently, and then assassinating them. Or rather, they would end up suffering from unfortunate accidents. She eventually defected from the KGB to the US and joined S.H.I.E.L.D. She would later marry Tony Stark, who gave her an all-black suit of Iron Man armor and a set of nanites that bonded to her skin in order to control the suit, all as an engagement present. But now here's where it gets awkward for Tony. Turns out Natasha is a traitor and reveals the identity of the Hulk, frames Captain America and Thor, and then aids the Liberators with their invasion of the US, all as a way to seek revenge for Russia, believing that the US made her country into a bankrupt nation of hookers and gangsters. She then kills Jarvis, holds Tony hostage in an attempt to extort him of his fortune, but then Tony uses the nanites in her body to freeze her in place, knocks her unconscious with a wine bottle, giving her brain damage. And then, when she's hospitalized, Hawkeye comes after her, shooting her in the head with one of his arrows, all because she was partially responsible for his family's death. Talk about dark. Up next at 5, Herald of Galactus Thor from Earth 717. Here we have another what if story concerning Thor, from Volume 1 of What If Thor Issue 1. This Thor appears in a story called What If Thor Was the Herald of Galactus. It's a bleak tale in which Thor, upon Galactus' arrival at Asgard, realizes that fighting against the Devourer of Worlds is futile, and ends up striking a deal with the cosmic entity instead. Leave Asgard alone and he would become Galactus' herald. He goes around informing the inhabitants of various planets that Galactus has chosen their worlds to satiate his appetite, and that their homes could not be spared. Destruction was inevitable. Eventually though, Thor ends up returning to his home on Asgard briefly, only to discover that his father Odin has been killed by Loki, and the trickster god has imprisoned all of his pals. So Thor rescues those remaining alive, sends them to Earth, and then brings Galactus to Asgard to consume it. Up next at 4, Vampire Captain America from 3931. Cap has a history of transforming into supernatural beings. Cap Wolf, anybody? This time around though, this Steve Rogers from Earth 3931 is a different horror movie being. He's a vampire. On this Earth, Steve was infected with vampirism during World War II by Baron Blood, who on this Earth is actually a vampire badass humanoid creature. After being bitten, Rogers develops new powers and ends up infecting the rest of the Avengers team, making them his personal slaves. The Exiles would encounter him when trying to fix his world, and eventually Rogers was decapitated, but that was not the end of him. He ends up surviving and reattaches his head to his body. From vampires to zombies, in at our next number we have Marvel Zombies Hawkeye from Earth 2149. We feature the zombie versions of the Avengers on our last list, but this time we're gonna get a bit more specific and look at one Avengers member in particular who has quite the compelling and eerie arc: Clint Barton of Earth 2149. Hawkeye's past is presumably the same as the 616 Hawkeye up until the zombie plague. When the Avengers attempted to stop the Sentry who had been infected, he bites all of them, overpowering them and infecting them. During the siege on Castle Doomstadt in Latveria, zombie Hawkeye is decapitated by Magneto. He uses Steve Rogers' shield to do so. Flash forward to 40 years later. T'Challa's grandson finds a very confused and incoherent head in the rubble of New York. Hawkeye is still alive but has gone insane thanks to, well, just being a head. He's taken back to T'Challa, who realizes that Hawkeye's hunger has dissipated and ends up giving him the Wasp's glass-domed suit to use as a body. He's later killed by the Hulk, who smashes his head in, crushing it, killing him once and for all. In at number 2, Skeletal Peter Parker from Earth 9811. Shout out to Smasher for the suggestion for this number. So this version of Spider-Man comes from What If Volume 2, issue 114 from 1998, issue 114 from 1998, in a story called Brave New World. It's a different take on Secret Wars, with the participants of that story event being trapped on Battleworld, never returning to Earth. And it's 25 years after the Secret Wars event, the first one that is. They're forced to settle down, with many of the heroes and villains getting married and having kids. Now in the midst of all this, we see Spider-Man still wearing the black symbiote costume, aka Venom, something that he had removed by Reed Richards after Secret Wars. But here's the kicker: because he never got the chance to get it removed, it permanently bonded to him, with the symbiote eventually consuming Peter's body entirely, leaving only a skeleton. At one point in the story, we see the symbiote jump off of Peter's skeleton when affected by a sonic attack, revealing that Parker has been dead for a very long time, and Venom has been running the show. Peter's mind hasn't totally been possessed by the symbiote though, which perhaps makes this even creepier. And finally, in at number 1, Dark Beast from Earth 295. While Beast is largely considered to be a member of the X-Men, it's not the only team in the comics that he was ever a part of. Once upon a time, he was a member of the Avengers too. He's also been a member of the Secret Avengers and the Defenders. He gets around a lot when it comes to superhero teams fighting for justice. But you know who doesn't? His dark counterpart, who hails from Earth 295, the Age of Apocalypse timeline, in which Charles Xavier was killed off, leading to Magneto leading the Resistance, and Apocalypse attacking sooner. Apocalypse manages to conquer North America because of it. So how does Xavier's absence turn Beast into a villain? Well, without Charles around, Beast's intelligence and desire for experimentation were unhindered by morals and ethics. He wasn't compassionate like his 616 counterpart, so he ends up becoming one of Apocalypse's chief scientists, who tortures and experiments on both humans and mutants unethically, including Cyclops and Jean Grey, which is how he ends up getting the nickname Beast, since he's so damn cruel and gruesome. He ends up escaping from that reality before it's blown to smithereens, coming to Earth 616. He then pretends to be 616 Hank McCoy, killing off the childhood friends of that Beast in order to cover his tracks, and eventually joins up with Onslaught. And at number 10, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? From What If issue 13 volume 2, here we have a story in which Charles Xavier becomes the Juggernaut. It's a simple answer to what would happen. Xavier ends up getting buried alive, but the consequences are much greater. Because of this, he's never able to create the X-Men, leaving the Fantastic Four responsible for taking on Magneto. It gets worse, snowballing into some major anti-mutant hysteria. Eventually Xavier manages to dig himself out of the ground, but it's too late for him to try to change the world for the better. He ends up using his super strength combined with his powerful psychic abilities to take over the US and enforce anti-human laws, using the X-Men to do so. In the process, he ends up defeating a lot of major Marvel characters, including the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Doctor Doom, Iron Man, Daredevil, and even the Hulk. Russia then tries to bomb the US, which is the catalyst for World War III. Xavier steps up, finding a way to make the Earth livable despite all the damage from the bomb, and ends up becoming the supreme leader of the planet. His only ask? That mutants aren't treated like crap. More mutants are born thanks to the bomb radiation, making up almost half of the planet's population. But despite the world finding some sort of peace, Xavier has gone mad, and in secret the remaining heroes and superpowered characters plot his demise, no longer believing in his dream since mutants now openly terrorize humans. This leads to a clash between Xavier and several of the X-Men on Asteroid M, with Quicksilver using explosives to launch Xavier into space, a potentially temporary solution that leaves Cyclops, Jean Grey, Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver with the responsibility of trying to repair the world in the meantime. Talk about a hefty storyline. And at number 9, what if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Conan the Barbarian has made many an appearance in What If comics over the years. In this story though, which appears in What If Volume 2 issue 16, Wolverine is transported to another time. Within the first few panels, he slays a T-Rex, impressing the locals. He finds himself completely immersing himself in the culture, getting a new outfit, and not understanding a damn word that anyone is saying. Eventually he crosses paths with Conan, a battle ensues, and Conan slits Wolverine's throat. Thinking he's killed killed him, he walks away, but little does he know that Wolverine has a mutant healing factor. He pursues him, more shenanigans ensue, and Wolverine ends up staying in Conan's world, with Conan being teleported back out to where the X-Men are battling on the moon. And he also ends up with Sonya, who looks just like Jean Grey apparently. Oh, redheads. And at number 8, Martha Kent has a miscarriage. Moving away from the Dark Knight and onto the Man of Steel now, we've got another take on retconned origin stories. In 1986, John Byron rewrote Superman's origin story in the limited series The Man of Steel. In this limited series, the Kents take Clark in as per usual, but Byron added an extra little detail. Prior to finding little Kal-El, Martha had a miscarriage. The Kents decided to exploit that miscarriage and pretend that Clark was actually their own. Guess that's one way of getting out of, neighbors asking questions. So why is this bothersome? It's the fact that the miscarriages became the motivation for why they adopted Clark rather than, out of the goodness of their hearts like in the initial origin story. It felt like an extra factor that was really unnecessary. An attempt to make the Kents more broody and justified in their need of, helping a baby that they found literally in the middle of nowhere. And at number 7, Three Jokers. Recently, DC came out with their Black Label imprint, comics aimed at more mature readers that are meant to exist outside of the main continuity for the most part. Three Jokers is a 3-issue miniseries released under the Black Label imprint, except it was revealed by Jeff Johns that the Three Jokers is part of the main continuity, which kinda confused some people. And this might be why. That imprint was inspired by a really ridiculous plot point that pretty much just disappeared entirely from the main continuity. So once upon a time in 2016, right at the end of the New 52, before Rebirth started up, Batman found himself in the Mobius chair, a plot device that basically gave him all of the knowledge in the world. Batman learns when he sat in this chair that there's actually 3 Jokers out there instead of 1. Then that revelation was dropped pretty much as soon as it was revealed, and hasn't been touched again since the mention of this Black Label 3 Jokers series. Oh boy. And at number 6, Damian Wayne. Back in 1987, DC released Batman Son of the Demon, in which he and Ra's al Ghul team up, and Bruce briefly considers becoming his heir. During that time though, Bruce has an affair with Ra's daughter Talia al Ghul, who ends up getting pregnant but then claims to have had a miscarriage. At the end of the story, it's revealed that she didn't have the miscarriage, and later on, Grant Morrison would introduce Damian Wayne, their son, the one who was conceived during Son of the Demon. Except, he changed some stuff. He was the product of Talia having drugged Bruce, forcibly sleeping with him in order to get pregnant as part of what she termed as a depraved eugenics experiment. So essentially she raped Batman, and Damian went from being the potential product of a heart-wrenching love affair to one that Batman had no choice in, since Damian's origins have been toyed with, including a retcon that suggested he was created thanks to cloning. Moving on to number 5, Hal Jordan as Parallax. Once upon a time, during the horrible reign of the Superman story arc that was the sequel to the even more horrible Death of the Superman story arc, I had to bring it up, Hal Jordan lost his shit after his home of Coast City was destroyed by Mongol and Cyborg Superman. This occurred in Green Lantern issue 46 and would become known as the Emerald Twilight story arc. A few issues later, completely distressed by Coast City being obliterated, Hal decides to use his power ring to try to recreate it, which is a big no-no for Green Lanterns. The Guardians of the Universe summon him for breaking the rule of using his ring for personal gain, which pisses Hal off even more. So he steals energy from the main power battery on the Guardians planet in order to finish recreating Coast City. The Green Lantern Corps have no choice but to stop him, but Hal ends up killing most of them, stealing each of their rings and leaving many for dead. It's then revealed in issue 50 that he's actually Parallax, the fear space insect of sorts. The literal embodiment of fear. Hal then sacrifices himself in the Final Night story arc, but then 10 years later Green Lantern gets a reboot and everything is retconned. Hal was just possessed, something that Batman would never really let him live down. Moving on to number 4, Barbara Gordon can walk. Again, back in 2011, DC introduced the New 52. The DC Universe was essentially reset, with some bits of continuity remaining intact, funny enough. One of those bits of continuity that remained was Barbara Gordon's history with being paralyzed. This is something that occurred in The Killing Joke and saw the character trapped in a wheelchair, retiring from her days as Batgirl, only to rise up and reclaim her heroic identity once more by becoming Oracle. Barbara became an inspiration for physically handicapped readers everywhere, and she was still a total badass too, despite the serious trauma and continuous obstacles that her character continued to face and overcome. But then, the New 52 changed that. While the history was intact, so was Barbara's legs, or I guess technically her spine. Despite having Gail Simone pen the Batgirl series, fans were outraged with the new Batgirl volume for taking Barbara out of her chair and putting her back into the Batgirl costume. Apparently she had received some really helpful and experimental physiotherapy that allowed her to walk again. Many felt that this was harmful to a positive kind of representation representation that Barbara stood for in the comics previously as Oracle. The one good thing though that the series did explore was the fact that Barbara was still very haunted by her past, and her struggles with her paralysis. It wasn't something that she was just cured of and never addressed again, thankfully. But still, I mean, she's pretty badass as Oracle. Moving on to number 3, a man of many races. The Flash mantle has a history of annoying retcons over the years. One of the worst by far though is Wally West ceasing to exist, but then 2 Wally West existing thanks to retcon messy fun time. So at the start of the New 52 and the DC Universe reboot that came with it, Wally West does not exist, or at least the one we knew didn't exist. Another new Wally West was kicking around, but he was the biracial son of Rudy West. But then that black Wally West was retconned when DC Rebirth came around, which was yet another reboot of the DC Universe, in which the original Wally West was brought back, and this Wally West, known as Wallace West, was the cousin of the original Wally West and the son of the New 52 Reverse Flash, Daniel West. He was also kicking around. Confused yet? Well, don't worry, DC explained the same name thing as a product of the 2 Wallys being named after their great-grandfather. But really, it was just because people were really pissed that the original Wally West had essentially disappeared, and they didn't want to get rid of the black Wally West, so they just were like, they both exist. Good job, DC, good job. Next up at number 2, Watchmen. Watchmen has long been considered one of the most important graphic novels in the history of the medium. When it came out, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons were praised by critics for transforming a medium that was often considered to be low art into something that was complex, thought-provoking, and subverted what we believed comics could do. It was a game changer, and it inspired many writers and artists that followed. Watchmen has long been considered a sacred text that does not get touched. Until DC decided that they could milk it for more money. As you can guess, Alan Moore was not fond of that. It first started with Before Watchmen, a group of limited series comics that acted as prequels leading up to the events of the main Watchmen graphic novel. Some of them were great. Darwin Cook, prior to passing away, rest in peace, did a fantastic job with the Minutemen series, expanding on the characters that Alan Moore had so finely crafted without making them into something that, felt out of line. Others weren't as well done, but their sales resulted in an unfortunate domino effect. DC brought the Watchmen into the prime continuity of their comics, making Dr. Manhattan a villain of sorts in the Doomsday Clock limited series, which acted as a direct sequel to Watchmen and tied in stories from the New 52 and Rebirth, because that's exactly what we all asked for, was a sequel to Watchmen. Nobody wanted that. No one. And if you're watching this and you actually wanted that, just go read it again, seriously. Re-educate yourself. That limited series Doomsday Clock is still ongoing now, and apparently by its conclusion the DC Universe will be forever changed again. Kinda sounds like one massive retcon in the works again, doesn't it? Doesn't seem uncharacteristic of DC. The reason why it lands on our list is not the fact that it takes something that's so darn good and threatens to ruin it entirely, it's because Dr. Manhattan has been turned into a plot device to explain all of the retconning of the New 52. Dr. Manhattan is said to be the one responsible for rebooting the universe and creating the New 52 universe. Essentially it is a retcon that was put in place to explain another massive retcon that a lot of people didn't really like. It also made Ozymandias regret what he had done in Watchmen, and that just isn't right. That's stupid. You cannot dilute a character like that. That's not fair, guys. And finally, in at number 1, Jason Todd is brought back. Finally, we have the silliest, most wretched retcon of them all. Jason Todd was brought back from the dead, and Superboy Prime punched him back to life. Alright, let's really break down Jason's history here. For starters, in 1988, when Batman's comic sales were suffering thanks to the low popularity of the new Robin, Jason Todd, Dennis O'Neil of DC suggests that allowing the audience to have an interactive experience and vote on a plot point in the comics would not only be a great way to attract audiences, but also solve their little Robin problem. In a 4-part story arc called A Death in the Family, readers had the option to choose to call in and vote on whether or not Jason Todd would survive from an encounter with the Joker. Fans voted that he be killed off. It was a really close call with a 72 vote margin, and evidence came out afterwards that hundreds of votes for Jason's death came in from a single person who had programmed a computer to dial the voting number every 90 seconds for 8 hours. Jason was brutally beaten to death by the Joker, and for a long time, Jason was considered one of the only characters in comic books to never be resurrected. It's almost like a rule. One of the only ones to truly stay dead, along with Bucky Barnes and Uncle Ben. But yeah, look how it panned out for all 3 of them, eh? Anywho, Jason was brought back to life. At first, the idea of him being resurrected was teased as part of the 2003 Hush storyline, but later in 2005, Judd Winnick brought him back into the fray with the Under the Hood story arc, with Todd having a vendetta against Batman, and it just went downhill from there, guys. In at number 10, Marvel 1602's Black Widow. Out of all of our scary alternates on this list, this version of Black Widow is perhaps the most tame. But why is she terrifying? It's because she uses her skills and abilities for some straight up evil stuff. This Natasha is from Earth 311 from Marvel 1602, a world in which she's a freelance spy and is considered the most dangerous woman in all of Europe. From Neil Gaiman and Andy Kubert, the Marvel 1602 series is an alternate reality in which we see our favorite Marvel characters operating during the year 1602 in Europe. The world is very much like it is on Earth 616 in that time period as well. Now, Natasha had previously worked alongside Matthew Murdock, but then betrayed him for Count Otto von Doom. Otto Octavius and Victor von Doom smucked together. She ended up becoming the villain's lover. She worked with him during the kidnapping of William Shakespeare, serving as the captain of his flying ship, up until she started questioning his authority and his plans, which resulted in him pushing her over the side of the ship to her death. What a way to go. Up next, number 9, Age of X Steve Rogers from Earth 11326. Here we have a version of Steve Rogers who's all for the killing and hunting of mutants, or at least he was in the beginning. As the leader of the Avengers, it was his job to hunt mutants down. During one mission in particular, he ends up giving into his bloodlust and kills Mystique, justifying her death as the right thing to do, because she was dangerous. That's when he discovers that she was actually protecting a group of mutant children. Steel Corpse, who is the alternative Tony Stark on that Earth, suffers from an emergency override with his armor and attempts to kill the children anyway, triggering the man inside the suit to inform Rogers to not save him but to save the kids instead. Steve ends up shooting him in the back of his head. This Steve is then killed while battling the Hulk, with Legacy then absorbing his memories as a way of saying thank you for changing his ways and attempting to help mutants in the end. He turns out for the better, but I guess, bloodlust is still pretty scary, right?
Number 8. What if John Jameson had become the Amazing Spider-Man? This one is more sad than it is scary, but it has a pretty tragic ending, so I still felt it was appropriate enough to include it here. In the final story included in this What If issue, we learn of an alternate reality where John Jameson ends up becoming Spider-Man, or Spider Jameson. Instead of being reviled by J. Jonah Jameson, his father, he's completely supported by JJ, because yeah, that's his son, and Jameson Sr. knows that he's, Spider-Man. Jameson even designs John's spider suit here. However, in the end, John dies while attempting to help with the same mission that 616 Peter Parker Spider-Man ended up saving him from, leaving his father heartbroken. What a tragic ending. Died the same way he died sort of in 616, but different circumstances? Number 7. What if the Avengers had never been? This issue ends pretty darkly in a reality where we explore the future of the Avengers, who did not stay banded together after Hulk left. Instead of going to search for Hulk together, Thor has the revelation that Hulk should be allowed to leave if he would like, as, none of the Avengers have taken an oath to remain loyal forever or any such thing. Iron Man then calls Thor out for only thinking this way because he too is planning on leaving. Stark obviously has some, abandonment issues, I feel like. Thor doesn't take kindly to this retort and does leave, and so do Hank and Janet, currently known here as Giant Man and the Wasp. In the end, Hulk teams up with Namor, and Iron Man is forced to face them solo styles after trying a few times to get the team back together. Eventually, Giant Man and the Wasp do end up showing up to help Iron Man out, but sadly, it ends up being too late. During the fray, Iron Man is badly injured, and while the heroes win the day in the end, their victory comes at the cost of Iron Man's life. How tragic. How dark. Death. Number 6. Public Enemy number 1. This story comes at us from the line of What If stories we got in 2006. It tells the tale of James Howlett, Logan, Wolverine, who ends up teaming up with Matteo DiPergio in Chicago to defeat criminal and mob boss Scarface. Here, Logan becomes a version of, the Skull, the man responsible for killing Scarface, but he also becomes something else. He wears a flag on his chest that shows the Jolly Roger and this skull and crossbones symbol, as well as the backstory of his family, who were burnt to a crisp, are meant to also make him another feared vigilante character, well known in the Marvel Universe as the Punisher. And when I say his family was burnt to a crisp, I mean killed, burnt to a crisp, not they got a bad sunburn, just so you know. This is a dark and gritty tale that also gives us a pretty awesome historical atmosphere, as well as an overall gangster story tone that's quite dark and draws you in. It's both scary and intriguing, which is how I like anything that's scary personally. I'm this is scary, but it makes me think, which I like. Number 5. What if Prince Namor of Atlantis grew up on land? This story's title doesn't inherently make it sound scary, and yet. Namor here, instead of siding with his own people of Atlantis and that heritage, decides to align himself with land dwellers, turning his back on the sea. He still fought in World War II, but during that time lost his friend, the android known as the Human Torch, or Jim Hammond. So, not Johnny Storm, different Human Torch. Immortalized as a hero, the Human Torch's memory lives on, but so too, does it seem, did he. 30 years later, the government gets a signal, which they think is from the Human Torch, calling out, repeating the same word he was saying on repeat when he went missing: Namor. Namor is sent in to investigate and finds his people have been enslaved by a race of half-human and half-Atlantean people who it turns out are still allied with Germany and the Axis, despite the war being long over. They plan on using the Human Torch under the sea to create a huge and damaging explosion. Namor prevents their plans, but is then ordered to destroy Atlantis, despite the fact that those enslaved are trying to fight back. In the end, he refuses to harm his own people, but the government doesn't care and they blow them up anyways, leaving Namor to once again live up to the meaning of his name, Avenging Sun. They also thought they killed Namor, but they didn't. Namor's not that easy to kill. Number 4. What if the Marvel superheroes had lost Atlantis attacks? Yes, what if? Atlantis attacks is such a weird story. Well, the world would basically be ruled by snake people is the answer, and yeah, that's what happens here. Here, Set is not prevented from arriving and being released upon the world. Once the Elder God does arrive, he sets to work raising the planet and turning everyone into his snake people, including some of our favorite heroes. In the end, only a handful of heroes and villains are left to set everything right, and even they fail. Quasar does manage in the end to defeat Set, but the world is still left covered in giant snakes and snake people with no foreseeable way to fix it, and many of our favorite heroes and villains are left either transformed into snake people or dead. Pretty scary. Number 3, what if the Avengers had become the pawns of Korvac? In this reality, we examined what would happen had Korvac been successful in defeating Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, and succeeded in standing up against all who opposed him because of the constant love of a woman. You can do anything if you have the love of a good person, apparently. In the end, Michael Korvac brings some of the heroes back to life to serve him as he goes up against even mightier enemies. Armed with the ultimate nullifier at the end, however, Korvac uses it to bring ultimate order to all things, which actually results in everything being destroyed in that reality, including the entire reality itself. So I guess bringing order means killing everything? I guess you can't have disorder if there's nothing. Number 2, Kingdom of Cain. This What If story comes to us from issue 94 of Volume 2, the 1989 What If series. Here we see the Juggernaut roams the post-apocalyptic landscape of the Earth completely alone, the sole survivor after a disastrous Sentinel attack which decimated the Earth's heroes and the Earth itself by leaking radiation poisoning all over the place. Juggernaut seems to be the only one capable of living in this place, and he becomes almost driven mad by the loneliness. Because he's the only one. Until he discovers that not everyone is dead, but actually some people have survived and are living in safety in an underground bunker. This discovery comes after he runs into Magneto, who tells Juggernaut that he knows for certain, having peered into alternate timelines, that this is all his fault, and that everyone that was killed all happened because he himself killed Charles Xavier, his stepbrother. When Cain finds the rest of the mutants who have survived, he hastily breaks through into their bunker, thereby exposing them to the radiation poisoning on the Earth's surface, and ultimately kills them too, albeit by accident, which, yeah, it's really sad. He's like, I don't want to be mean, I just want to talk to someone, and they're like, we're dying now because of you, get out of here. No one wants to talk to you, Cain. Number 1, what if the Fantastic Four's second child had lived? This doesn't sound like it should be the scariest story on the list, but it definitely is. The first story in this series is just a straight-up horror story where Sue ends up giving birth to a healthy baby girl, but dying herself in childbirth. And that's not even the scary part. From the beginning, the doctors warned her that her pregnancy would be difficult, and from the beginning, Franklin Richards knew something was wrong with his unborn sister. is like the most dark, menacing face. When the baby does come into the world, who's named after her deceased mother, so I guess like Sue Jr., it's revealed that she is actually an energy-draining monster who kills those around her by feeding on their life force energy. Franklin is finally able to convince his father of this, but too late, as Reed dies in the ensuing battle, leaving Franklin all alone.
And at number 10, Joe Chill who? One character that is critical to the Batman mythos but is constantly subjected to changes is Joe Chill, the petty criminal who killed Bruce Wayne's parents in that alleyway when he was a boy. For starters, Joe Chill being the one responsible was briefly retconned in the 90s with Zero Hour, and the truth was left hanging for years concerning whether or not Chill was really the one behind the Wayne's deaths. Then, in 2006 Infinite Crisis issue 6, he was confirmed to be their killer once again. But let's backtrack a little. This is where it gets annoying, frustrating, and a little scary, if messing with continuity or the thought of doing so is something that is frightful to you, which it should be, especially considering all of the mess that DC has created with Joe Chill. The way in which Batman discovers that Joe is his parents' killer has changed time and time again. It seems as if every several years we get a new take on Bruce's origin story, and him confronting Joe, or him rediscovering that Joe was the one who pulled the trigger, or him hunting him down and having some big moral dilemma about the whole darn thing. There have been multiple variations pertaining to Joe Chill's fate, various suspects, various storylines in which DC characters have believed to find new evidence, and then hunted down the real person responsible. Initially, we got a glimpse of this back in Detective Comics issue 33 in 1939. That was when we got Batman's origin story for the very first time. In 1948, in Batman issue 47, that man who murdered the Waynes was revealed to be a guy named Joe Chill. But then, the story changed again in 1956, then another time in 1968, then again in 1969, again in 1972, 1976, another time in 1982 where he was the Joker's hitman, and that whole storyline would then be shown in the 1989 Batman movie, then again in 1984, 1985, 1986, 1987, 1989, 1998 in which Selina Kyle witnessed their murders, in 1999 in which the Wayne board was really behind it, 2001, 2003, 2006, 2008 in which Joe Chill commits suicide thanks to Batman's persuasion, 2012 in which the Penguin was suspected to be behind the hit, 2015 in which Batman encounters him through the powers he develops from the Mobius chair, and so many more adaptations that we didn't even cover. Most of the ones we did were in the comics, but there's a lot of stuff in the animated universe as well, and in other movies, and in Gotham. So if that didn't make sense as to why it's scary, here is another reason why it is pretty darn frightening. All of this retconning literally threatens to change Batman's mythos every single damn time that his origin story is redone. It's frightening. DC, please stop giving us new reasons and new scenarios in which we see Batman have to relive his previous trauma and choose whether or not to kill the man who killed his parents, who may have not actually been the man who killed his parents. Moving on to number 9, Jason Todd's hair. This one's a little less stressful than our last number. Back when Jason Todd was first introduced in the comics in 1983, it was as Dick Grayson's replacement, with the former Robin now heading the Teen Titans team. While it was a great thing that the new Teen Titans title was selling, DC felt that Batman may suffer from this, and introduced a brand new Robin that debuted in Batman issue 357. In his first few appearances, he was distinguished from Dick Grayson by having strawberry red hair, which was later changed because the character lacked popularity, so DC strove to make Jason Todd a little bit more like Dick. While that's technically a retcon in itself, perhaps what's even better is the fact that this change in hair color is something Todd would later on address after he was brought back from the dead. More on that later. Todd would admit that when he was Robin, Batman made him dye his hair to look more like Dick Grayson. While he never gives a full reason for Bruce making him do this, it's implied it's some sort of marketing ploy. But really, it just kind of feels like Batman fetishized Grayson, if we're being honest.
Number 8. What if Ord resurrected Jean Grey instead of Colossus? In this story, Jean is brought back to life at a time where it is revealed that Cassandra Nova holds influence over Emma Frost. Fearing the return of the Phoenix Force, which would join to Jean Grey once more, Emma decides to take matters into her own hands. Her own diamond hands. It's revealed that the Phoenix Force has been lurking within her cuckoo's minds, and she decides to take hold of it, killing them in the process. Tragic. She then plans on defeating Jean. The X-Men band together to face her, and S.H.I.E.L.D. and S.W.O.R.D. also conveniently join the fray. Like, we're here too. In the end, Ord, Beast, Emma, and her cuckoos and Kitty lay dead, and the Phoenix is contained, but Cassandra remains undetected, still out there waiting for the right moment to strike. Number 7. What If? The Spider Who Went Into the Cold. This story comes to us from the What If story Spider-Man vs. Wolverine, and asks the question, what if Spider-Man never came back out from the cold? This story sees Peter Parker actually kill someone while acting as Spider-Man. It was an accident. He thought the person had armor that would protect him from the hit, but it was powered down. Of course, who should be working alongside Spidey when this happens, but of course Wolverine, who shows no remorse for what Spider-Man has done, jokingly suggesting that they cry about it. In the end, this event changes Peter after he and Wolverine save his friend Alex, and this causes him to become a killing machine. He receives further training, and although he still has a sense of morality, no longer has qualms with taking out the bad guys permanently. He leaves MJ and his life behind, setting out to join S.H.I.E.L.D, working on as a hired Black Ops team. Also, I love a good Spider-Man Wolverine team up because it's just not what you usually get. I love when they team up. Number 6. What if Iron Man had been a traitor? I personally think this one is pretty scary if you put yourself in Iron Man's shoes. For me, one of my biggest fears, and I think one of the most human fears out there, is just a lack of control. In Tony Stark's case, he doesn't really have any control over what he does or how he acts in this story, but is forced into being a traitor when a rival country gains control of his heart. If he refuses to do as is demanded of him, he is put through intense and unyielding chest pains and could be killed. This ends up putting him on a path to attempt to kill Reed Richards, all while leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for Reed to follow so that he might be able to figure out that Stark's actions are not his true intentions and that he is being manipulated into harming his compatriots and betraying his country. Number 5. What if the man, the monster? This is actually one of the scariest ones for me in my opinion. This story was such an intense story that we didn't even get an introduction from the Watcher Uada. Here we have a story where the roles are reversed between Bruce and the Hulk, where Bruce is the monster and the Hulk, or Starman as he's known here, is the sensitive, compassionate one. Here Bruce Banner is a colonel who marries Betty only to mistreat her after being traumatized from years of being mistreated by his own father and witnessing the cruelty his father doled out to his mother. The gamma radiation does split Banner into two beings here, transforming him into another creature with immense power, but this creature is the side of him that actually represents the compassionate side of this trauma, the side who wants to protect, not hurt, whereas Bruce Banner himself becomes the malicious monster. We hear this story from Betty's perspective, who ends up trying to speak out on the way Bruce has treated her, only to have her father not even believe her and send her back to Bruce once she's left, and to later have her confession to Doc Samson manipulated by Colonel Banner, causing her to end up getting sent to a mental institution. Also, I'm not sure what's happening in this last panel of this comic, if it's just like she doesn't know that they're about to come get her and take her away, or if she's there and she's just like, it's fine that I'm here. I'm gonna assume it's the first one, because otherwise that's a really weird way to end that story. Number 4. What if Legion had killed Xavier and Magneto? Just imagine how messed up Age of Apocalypse would be, but also you don't have to because the story's gonna do it for you. Thank you, What If. As always, when things get this bad, we have Nate to save the day. Nate Summers believes he can band together his own team of the few heroes left alive after Apocalypse's unopposed rise to take down Apocalypse and even travel back to the past to make things right. Silly Nate Summers. Instead, this only results in Captain America and Wolverine. Wolverine's hair here, by the way, is the real horror show of this story, opposing Nate's plan once it is revealed. Seeing Nate in Apocalypse's armor after Nate has defeated Apocalypse causes them to believe that Nate is trying to kind of take the place of Apocalypse and in essence become a new kind of tyrant, but a tyrant all the same. As Nate uses the Eye of Agamotto and Molecule Man to travel back in time to what he doesn't know is an alternate reality's past, Captain America, armed with Thor's hammer, sends a bolt of lightning after him that kills thousands in that past, setting in motion the apocalypse once more. Number 3. What if Danger became a bride of Ultron? I like how the title is a bride, even though in this reality Danger becomes like the ultimate bride of Ultron. A bride, as though in this reality Ultron is like multiple brides. I feel like that never works out for him, to be honest. But either way, this gives Ultron what he has always truly desired, that sweet, sweet love connection. I mean, completion, yes. Completion. That's what he's looking for. After Danger rebels against the X-Men seeking revenge basically for years of being used and trapped as their danger room with no one acknowledging her sentience, Ultron hears her calling out, senses her, and leaves his creation Victor, destroying him in order to find her. The two come together and as a wedding present, Ultron gives Danger her father, Professor X, helpless against the technology as his telepathic powers don't work on them. Ultron has him crushed and killed. The story ends with Danger and Ultron soaring off to bring havoc to the universe, flying through space on their creepy mishmashed Sentinel child. It's like a scary story, but it's also a romance story at the same time. Number 2, what if Wolverine was never deprogrammed? This is a pretty scary and gruesome one, I'm not gonna lie. Though, you know, still keeping in line with the PG-13 aspect of comics, a lot of the gore is hidden, but you can still imagine it, and when you imagine what's happening to these people here, it's pretty insane. Here we get to imagine what if Wolverine just kept on being a killing machine, brainwashed into taking out his fellow heroes, including all of those that he loved. As in many of these potential scenarios, it comes down to Wolverine and Kitty Pryde. Kitty is unable to fathom how Wolverine could be so far gone that he'd kill her, and yet after witnessing the death of everyone at his hands, including Invisible Woman, who is clawed through the bottom of her feet before getting claws right through her face, and Captain America, who gets claws right up through the bottom of his jaw through his entire head, she is forced to confront the reality that her mentor and friend Logan is really gone. Like, that's definitely gonna convince you once you see that. You're like, okay, there's no hope for you. In the end, she sacrifices her hand, and it's implied her life in killing Wolverine. She phases her hand through his head, turning it solid, and then letting go as Wolverine instinctively slices off her arm, preventing his body from being unable to heal due to the hand lodged in his brain. That'll definitely prevent someone from healing. I don't even want to think about how you try to do that. How do you function with the hand in your brain? I ask you. Number 1, what if Spider-Man had rejected the spider? This is a pretty creepy crawly, scary one. It begins with Peter Cocoon but refusing to take the spider's path home. Instead, he kills the giant spider that confronts him while in metamorphosis, remaining lost and unable to move forward, only half a being, until Venom escapes Matt Gargan and prison in order to rejoin with Peter Parker, aware that he is stuck in this stasis mode and vulnerable. Venom bonds with the Cocoon, and after months of battling with Peter inside, is eventually reborn as a new being who goes by the name Poison. Half Peter, half Venom symbiote, permanently bonded. Poison confronts Mary Jane at the Avengers Mansion, but after horrifically attacking her, Aunt May, Wolverine, and Luke Cage, and being spurned by her, disappears, resurrecting his first love, Gwen Stacy, and likely planning to turn her into his monstrous bride. Also, there's a weird thing that happens in that story where that poison basically pierces Luke Cage's skin, and then he's like, haha, even I can pierce your stone skin because I'm sharp enough, and I was like, wait, what just happened? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. But other than that, it's all pretty good, I think.
In at 10, Ultimate. The Ultimate Universe is very similar to the normal 616 counterpart. However, there are some differences that certainly make this thing scarier than the main continuity. Captain America is anti-French for some reason. Ultimate Mr. Fantastic is a villain called the Maker. Ultimate Thanos is gold instead of purple. Oh yeah, and Ultimate Magneto is way too dark compared to Prime Magneto. Prime Magneto hates humans, but Ultimate Magneto is like a tyrant in that he considers all humans insects. Ultimate Wolverine is shown to be interested in teenage girls, while Earth 616 Wolverine is more honorable, because sure, okay, Earth 616 Cyclops and Wolverine didn't see eye to eye, but Wolverine would never have killed Cyclops just so that he could sleep with his girl. Yeah, and Wolverine wants to sleep with Jean Grey, a teenager, when Wolverine is in his 30s, at least in the Ultimate Universe. Oh, and there's also a romantic relationship between Wanda and Pietro, which is probably the scariest thing on in this reality, on this Earth, and the reason I wanted it on this list. And at 9, Thanos wins. While the heroes of the MCU already received a little bit of a taste of a reality in which Thanos achieved his ultimate goal by erasing half the population of the universe in Avengers Infinity War, there exists a still darker universe where Thanos wins. Determined to finally impress death, Thanos eradicated every living being on planet Earth, including the superheroes and Frank Castle. The former Punisher made deals with both Mephisto and Galactus to find a new life of vengeance as the Cosmic Ghost Rider and stop King Thanos' dark reality from ever happening. As time went by though, the heroes of Earth grew old and weak, but Thanos only grew stronger, his eternal quest to please death leading him to kill almost every living thing in the known galaxy, and becoming the king of what remained in his wake. Nothing. I don't know why you'd want to be king of nothing. Seems pointless in my opinion, and I'm a king, so I feel like my expertise here, but whatever, okay? As long as it's not this universe, I'm fine with it. Oh, and not only that, but knowing that he had to die in order to be with death, King Thanos gave a piece of the Time Stone to his servant, the Rider, and tasked him with going back in time to drag his younger self to the future so that he could be killed by present Thanos.
And at number 8, Sauron. Don't be confused by its name. This is no Middle-earth Sauron. Luckily. Sauron of the Marvel Universe is quite different, despite being evil and having taken the name Sauron after the Lord of the Rings villain. Sauron is the alter ego of Khal Lycos, who has a Jekyll and Hyde relationship of sorts with this humanoid pterodactyl form of his. He's essentially an energy vampire who often lives within the prehistoric jungle known as the Savage Land. First appearing in this form in X-Men issue 60 back in 1969, Sauron was initially meant to be a giant bat-like creature, but back in those times, the comics code authority was still in effect, somewhat. And his creators Roy Thomas and Neil Adams inquired with the organization, who suggested that the character's vampiric traits would be in violation of the code. So instead of going with something that resembled a giant vampire bat, which was banned according to the code, they ended up opting out for a form that looked more like a pterodactyl. Anywho, what can Sauron do aside from look absolutely terrifying? Well, he's got all the superhuman fixings: strength, speed, stamina, durability, and intelligence. He flies, duh, has hypnotic eyes, fire breath, razor-sharp claws, and most importantly, he can absorb life forces and mutant powers, and can sense mutants too. In addition to this, he can gain the powers of other mutants. Once, while battling against the Avengers and the X-Men, he was shot in the head by the second Black Widow, but survived thanks to having absorbed Wolverine's healing factor. And at 7, the Wendigo. The Wendigo is most well known in Marvel Comics for being the first foe of Wolverine's, the enemy in which Wolverine and the Hulk take on together. Based on the Wendigo legend of the Algonquin people, it's a large, beastly creature with superhuman strength, stamina, durability, and agility. It has enhanced speed, hardened and sharp talons, and a regenerative healing factor. It's found in the woods of northern Canada and is the result of a curse that takes place under very specific conditions, primarily when a human in the forests feed on human flesh. Any of you familiar with the recent video game title Until Dawn may be familiar with the legends, although the Wendigo of Marvel Comics looks quite different than the video game's representation. Now, over the years, the Wendigo has taken on its fair share of mutants, including Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and the members of Alpha Flight. And the Wendigo isn't just one character either. Various different Wendigo have appeared over the years, all formerly humans who partook in cannibalism and have become these wretched creatures. And at 6, Predator X. Predator X first hit the panels of Marvel Comics back in 2007 in New X-Men issue 34. It is a grotesque beast, reptile-like, with superhuman strength and speed, sharp claws and teeth, toxic saliva, accelerated hearing, and its body is covered in non-toxic inorganic mercury. That latter bit means it is highly resistant to physical damage and can draw materials in the environment surrounding it to help reform itself. So why is it scary? If you aren't already kind of freaked out by it? Well, it can track mutants on their genetic signature and is pretty much tireless, meaning it can track its prey relentlessly until it succeeds, wearing down its target for as long as necessary. It can run at speeds of 199 kilometers an hour for a total of 19 hours straight before having to slow down. Luckily, its insides are not as durable as its outsides. Wolverine managed to kill it by tearing it apart from the inside out with his claws. But fun fact, it killed one of the villains that we mentioned on our part 1 list, Peeper, who it devoured on the side of a road. It's vicious to say the least. Predator X was created thanks to Stryker, who, prior to dying, requested that a living weapon be made in order to combat the coming of a mutant Antichrist, aka Hope Summers. Moving on to number 5, Sugar Man. Sugar Man is by no means a good X-Men villain, but he is definitely a terrifying one to take in. First debuting in the Age of Apocalypse timeline, Earth 295, in Generation Next issue 2 in 1995, Sugar Man would manage to sneak his way out of that reality and onto Earth 616, when bombs are blowing the crap out of 295 as a last resort means to be rid of Apocalypse. Sugar Man, aside from being hideous and offensive to the eyes, is an expert biologist and geneticist. He has 4 arms, superhuman strength, razor-sharp teeth and claws, an indefinitely long bioelectric tongue, ew, an enhanced sense of smell, and has the ability to alter his body mass and size, which is actually how he sneaked his way over to 616, by hiding in Colossus's boot of all places. He's responsible for a handful of deaths on Earth 295, and when he arrives on 616, he ends up forcibly enslaving hundreds of mutants for the magistrates. The reason why he really ends up on this list? Just look at him. From scary looks to scary intentions, moving on to number 4, we have the Reavers. The Reavers are a team of criminal cyborgs who first debuted in Uncanny X-Men issue 229 back in May of 1988, created by Chris Claremont and Mark Silvestri. The Reavers, led by a man named Donald Pierce, are dedicated to the destruction of mutants, and specifically the destruction of Wolverine. Initially, they were a gang of looters who operated in Australia, but began to branch out when they used the mutant gateway to teleport across the globe in order to pull off more sophisticated robberies. The X-Men stopped them, with only a handful of the Reavers escaping that first encounter, later reassembling under Pierce, who takes the team into a more militarized direction, using them as an assassination squadron of sorts bent on taking vengeance on the X-Men. They've done some pretty messed up stuff over the years, including capturing Wolverine, torturing him, and crucifying him. They're an extremist team bent on eliminating mutant kind, humans who have become cyborgs as part of the cause. And they've even stirred up trouble in alternate timelines too. In Age of Apocalypse, they were a band of human traitors who served the titular villain, and in the Ultimate Marvel Universe, they are human gladiators who have undergone surgery to become cyborgs, all for the purpose of hunting down mutants on live television. That's messed up. I mean, imagine running into a team of extremists like that who embrace technology in order to wipe out a race. Yeah, they're scary because they're a foe of the X-Men who are a little bit more realistic antagonists compared to some of their other enemies. We also got to see the Reavers make a cinematic debut in Logan, and needless to say they're pretty darn scary in their live action adaptation as well. And at 3, the Purifiers. The Purifiers are one step up from the Reavers, and are unsettling for very similar reasons. They're a paramilitary and terrorist organization, also created by Chris Claremont, that debuted in Marvel graphic novel issue 5, X-Men God Loves, Man Kills. And they are led by none other than Reverend William Stryker, who is their founder. So their whole shtick is that they're Christian fundamentalists who believe that they are fighting a holy war against mutants. They see mutants as the children of the devil and therefore need to be exterminated. In their first appearance, they abducted Charles Xavier and several members of the X-Men team, killed mutant children, fought against Magneto, and almost executed Kitty Pryde. Luckily for her, one of Stryker's guards grew horrified with his actions and shot Stryker, resulting in Kitty getting away and Stryker being sent to prison. That wasn't the last of them though. Even after Stryker no longer led the group, other successors took over the leadership mantle, including his own son Jason Stryker. Later on, the Purifiers got their hands on Warren Worthington III's wings and used blood from them, extracted Apocalypse's techno-organic strain inside of them in order to graft it and then give to the Purifiers, giving them their own wings, a specific subgroup that would be called the Choir, whose whole MO was to, I quote, strike down Satan's spawn with God's own might. Archangel would later massacre all of the Choir minus 3 members. And at number 2, Mr. Sinister. Mr. Sinister is one of the most notorious X-Men villains. Sinister, aka Nathaniel Essex, first debuted as the employer of the assassin group the Marauders, mentioned in the Uncanny X-Men issue 212 in 1986, but first seen in the Uncanny X-Men issue 221, almost a whole year later. Not only is his aesthetic unsettling, but he's also capable of some really terrifying stuff. He's telepathic, telekinetic, has superhuman strength, durability, and longevity, can create concussive energy projections, and, potentially scariest of all, can manipulate his body on a molecular level. Born in 1859, he was obsessed with Darwin's theories and was considered an unorthodox biologist, conducting immoral experiments that would make him an outcast amongst his peers. He even dug up his dead firstborn child to experiment on it. After awakening Apocalypse, the villain would painfully transform him into an ageless being, with Essex taking on the name Sinister, which was the last thing that his wife called him on her deathbed. It's a wee bit masochistic, isn't it? And finally, in our number 1 spot, the Phoenix Force. One of the most terrifying foes that the X-Men have ever faced off against is the Phoenix Force, an entity that is an immortal and immutable manifestation of the universal force of life and passion, born of the void between states of being, the nexus of all psionic energy which does, has, and ever will exist within the Marvel Multiverse. The Phoenix Force requires a host, and it manifested within Jean Grey, who, when losing control of it, became the Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix has a vast amount of abilities, is able to manipulate matter, energy, and life force, and has cosmic awareness, all of which makes Jean's Dark Phoenix incredibly powerful and threatening. In many cases, in alternate realities, Jean has completely wiped out the planet or consumed the universe when not stopped by the X-Men. And while much of the Phoenix saga has been retconned, along with Jean dying and coming back to life, and then dying and coming back to life again, the Phoenix Force has still proven to be rather deadly regardless. Over the years in the comics, the Phoenix Force has proven capable of taking on powerful foes like the Beyonder, absorbing stars for energy that creates supernovas capable of wiping out entire planets, and even flat out wiping out all of existence in What If issue 27 volume 1. I don't know about you guys, but to me that's scary as hell.